Hey everybody. Well, the last week has been really tough on jump planes in the United States. First there was a Twin Otter crash in Tennessee, and then yesterday we lost a King Air in Kansas. Now I'm going to go over both of these crashes and see what we can learn from them. My name is Kerry McCauley and welcome to my channel. Now the first crash I want to talk about is the Twin Otter crash in Tennessee that happened last Sunday, June 8th in 2024. And what happened was there were 20 people on board, probably 18 or 19 skydivers, not really sure how many pilots were on board at this point. And they were departing runway 24 in Tullahoma, Tennessee, and lost the left engine on takeoff, which is the nightmare scenario for all jump pilots. You know, right after takeoff, losing an engine is what you really hate to see happen, and also what you should train for the most, because that's the worst place to lose the engine. You're not really high. Reports say they were between 300 and 600 feet at that point. You haven't really developed your full climb speed yet. You probably still have some flaps out, and boom, you lose an engine, and now you've got your hands full. Now, luckily, they were in a Twin Otter. If I was going to be in any plane and lose the engine, I'd want to be in a Twin Otter. I've got about 300 hours flying jumpers in Twin Otter. I love that plane. It's my favorite jump plane to fly. And they've got just great capabilities all the way around, but especially single engine capabilities. These planes are a beast. I think this one had upgraded engines, so more horsepower. Their single engine handling is excellent, and they should be able to climb out in most situations. Now, don't know how old the engines are, how tired they were. It was a hot day, so density altitude was up there with between 18 and 20 jumpers on board. Depending on how much fuel they had, pretty close to max gross. So it's going to struggle like any twin, but most of the time a Twin Otter in these conditions should be able to at least hold altitude, if not climb away on one engine. Not really sure what the scenario was, and I want to make sure clear right now, I was not in the plane. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. Haven't talked to anybody who was there, so I'm just going to kind of speculate a little bit here. I don't know what happened. I'm not trying to bash on the pilot at all. Everybody survived this crash, which is an absolute miracle. But I want to kind of go over what I think might have happened and what I would have done in the situation to try to keep any other pilots that fly Twin Otters and any other plane just a little bit safer. So basically what you're supposed to do in the Twin Otter after takeoff, if you lose an engine, is make sure that you're at full power within temp and torque limits. Make sure the RPMs are all the way up. RPM levers full forward. Go to 10 degrees flaps. A little bit of flaps help you maintain directional control. Whenever I was flying the Otter, we always took off with 20 degrees flaps. That's kind of the short field configuration. 30 degrees if it's really short, but we always use 20. After you clear the obstacle, you reduce it to 10 degrees, and if you have an engine out, leave those 10 degrees flaps in until you have the airplane configured for single engine flight. At this point, if you've got auto feather system in the plane and it's working and it's turned on, ensure that the other auto feather works. The couple Twin Otters I flew a couple of different ones. One had the auto feather system, one did not. One of them, you know, the one that did, it worked. It was really nice to have that, you know, kind of reduces your workload on a single engine scenario. So check to make sure that the engine is feathered. If it's not, feather it manually. Go through the drill, you know, identify dead foot, dead engine, pull the dead throttle back, make sure you're not killing the good engine, feather that engine, secure it, trim it up, a little bit of rudder trim, 5 degrees into the good engine. And then what you're supposed to do is maintain your heading within 15 degrees. If you have to do a turn to avoid an obstacle, up no more than 15-degree turn if you can get away with it, because you're trying to get every ounce of performance out of this plane so you can fly away. And you know, any steep turn is going to kill, any steep turn or bank is going to kill your climb performance. So you want to go straight ahead, get the plane in control. And what I never thought I was going to do is return to the airport, and it kind of looks like that's what this pilot did. He took off on runway 24 and then was turning around, coming back to try to land on 36, when unfortunately got a little low, possibly slow, depends on who you talk to, and struck a tree short of the runway. It ripped the wing off, cartwheeled the plane, the nose impacted. unbelievably, nobody was killed. It's a complete miracle. There were a few injuries. I think the most serious injury is to the pilot. He seems to be in pretty bad shape, but he's not dead, which is really good. And, you know, pilots, unfortunately, we're the ones who always arrive at the scene of the accident first. We're in the pointy end of the airplane, and that's what always hits first. So almost always the pilots get the worst result of an airplane crash. So the fact that nobody's dead is a miracle. Now, that probably has something to do with, if you see the pictures here, the fuselage is intact. These days, all jumpers are wearing seat belts and helmets on takeoff. We leave them on until 1,500 feet because any lower than that, we're probably not going to get out of the plane. So that probably also played a part in the good outcome, relatively good outcome in this crash. Now, like I said, I always was planning on flying out straight ahead. You know, if you're losing altitude, pick a spot in front of you. Don't try the impossible turn. You know, just find a safe place to set it down. But you don't need to be in a hurry to get back to the airport. You know, unless you're on fire or you think that the other engine is in imminent danger of quitting as well, don't try to go back to the airport. Climb, get some altitude. You know, the book says, climb out, manage your electrical systems and your fuel usage, and get to a safe altitude, assess the situation, then return to the airport. When you've got jumpers on board, keep climbing. Even if you're only climbing at 50 or 100 feet a minute, the longer you climb, the more fuel you burn, the lighter you're going to be. And if you only can get it up to 1,500 feet, most of the skydivers can get out. And once the jumpers start leaving, you're in a much better situation to land the airplane. You're a lot lighter. If you can get everybody out, that's fantastic. Now you've got a really light airplane. It'll handle much better than trying to return to the airport with a full load. And you're supposed to be turning into the good engine a little bit, 5 degrees into the good engine. Now, I don't know which way this pilot turned. If you look at the Google Earth here of the airport in Tullahoma, he took off on 2-4 and then was coming around to try to make it back and land on 3-6. And he landed and he impacted the tree right by the Beechcraft Museum, short and not even aligned with the runway. My guess is, and I don't know this for a fact, is that he was doing a left turn to come back around, which would be putting him turning into the dead engine. That's what you definitely don't want to do. And that's just the direction most pilots will want to turn. The pilot's flying, he's in the left seat. We're just more comfortable and turning to the left. But that's definitely what you don't want to do if you've lost your left engine, because you're in danger of a VMC roll situation. VMC is the airspeed that they've calculated beyond which you can't control the airplane if your good engine is producing max power and a couple other conditions are met. So in a single engine situation, that's what you really want to avoid, is a VMC incident, losing control of the airplane. There's a video here of a Queen Air on one engine that loses control. He's got plenty of altitude. He's coming back to the airport. You can hear the engine popping a little bit. And he makes it turn, probably turning from downwind to base, gets too slow, plane immediately loses control, rolls straight in. And that right there is why you have to be so careful if you lose an engine on takeoff or at any time when flying a twin. Because the VMC loss of control scenario is something that happens far too often, and as you saw, almost always with fatal results. So we're really lucky that this Twin Otter didn't have that happen to it. And I thought about this a lot. I used to fly jumpers in a Queen Air back in the early 90s. And when I started flying it, I ran the numbers and realized that if I lost an engine on takeoff at max gross, which I almost always am, and when you're flying jumpers, and especially in the Queen Air, and it was a reasonably hot day or even a normal day, my single engine performance was not going to be stellar. I was probably going to be able to maintain altitude, maybe get 100 feet per minute climb, but I knew that I'd have to perform everything perfectly. I'd have to get the gear up right away, get the flaps up right away, feather that, go through the drill, verify, identify, verify, feather, secure the engine, get the trim set, get the, lift the dead engine. Yeah, everything has to be perfect for you to get every ounce of performance out of that plane. And it paid off, sort of. I did lose an engine in the Queen Air when I was flying jumpers. Luckily, it wasn't on takeoff. It was at about 8,000 feet on the climb. I was just on a normal climb, and I looked over at the left engine nacelle, and I noticed a small brown spot that I knew wasn't there before because I had just got done waxing that engine cowl. We waxed that plane a little bit at a time, and I knew that brown spot wasn't there before. Checked my engine instruments, everything looked good. Looked back at the spot, it had gotten bigger. Something was wrong, so I immediately shut the engine down. My biggest fear at that point was fire. If some hot gas is getting hot enough to discolor and burn the paint on the engine cowling, there's something wrong. And immediately communicated with the jumpers, we're going to stop climbing. I turned back to the drop zone, and in single engine performance, I was probably losing about 50 to 100 feet per minute. Not a big deal. Flew them back to the drop zone, set them up on a normal jump run, and that's when the confusion started, because the jumpers wanted to know what was going on. Can they do the normal climb out, which is climbing on the outside of the airplane and do their jump? I said, no, I don't want all the weight in the back of the tail. Just stay where you are and then exit one at a time. And then they actually spotted me a little bit. It was before GPS, so they have lights tell me to go right or left to give them the perfect spot over the drop zone. Sure, I accommodated them. Then they give me the cut signal, which is when I'm supposed to cut the left engine back to make it easier for them to climb out. And I looked over, it's like, well, the propeller is stopped, so that's about as cut as it gets. And I continued to have to yell back and forth between all the skydivers because they were all confused, and it was hard for the people in the back to hear what was going on up in the cockpit area. Until finally I kind of had enough, and I said, get the heck out of my gosh darn airplane, or words to that effect. That worked, and they all got out. So communication is also key if you're flying skydivers, because all that weight shifting toward the back can be tough to handle with both engines operating. I mean, there's been a lot of planes. There's a video of a King Air stalling with the jumpers on the back hanging out too long, and the pilot got too slow. And so that's something that you really have to be careful of. So, if you're flying jumpers, that's something extra to consider. First things first, though, if you lose an engine, especially on takeoff, slow down. Do things in order. Don't do a bunch of panic moves and pull a bunch of levers and immediately bank back toward the airplane. Fly straight ahead, go through the drill, secure the engine, get the plane trimmed up, go straight ahead. If you need to bank, just very shallow 15-degree banks. And if you can maintain a little bit of a climb, keep climbing. If you got jumpers, climb up to 3,500 feet, come back to the drop zone. Most skydivers, they have to do a hop and pop, demonstrate their ability to get out at 3,500 feet AGL to get their license. So most of the solo jumpers can get out then. If you've still got tandems on board, they need a little bit more altitude, climb a little bit higher. If it's climbing and the other engine is performing well, just keep climbing. If it takes you a little bit longer, so what? As long as you have the fuel for it, get them up to a safe altitude, 7,500 feet, kick them out. Now you've got an empty airplane. Piece of cake. Come on and land. Single engine landings are what you train for when you get your multi-engine license. So it's not that big of a deal. It's an emergency situation, but it's not a time-critical emergency situation. Kind of like the guy that had a rudder problem in the 310 last month. He immediately was trying to make it back to the airport, and instead of taking his time climbing out and assessing the situation, just slow down and keep control of the airplane. That's the most important thing. Go to blue line or a little faster. A little extra speed is going to be fine if you've got some altitude to sacrifice, or just hold altitude. Just don't overbank it. Don't get too slow. Don't get into a VMC situation. Now, the next crash I want to talk about is the crazy King Air crash in Gardner, Kansas. This one takes the cake. And I can laugh about it because, again, Nobody died in this crash. Actually, there weren't even any injuries. 2 pilots on board, and they're both fine, bumps and bruises. But crazy outcome to this one. So it was a skydiving plane, King Air 90, left Butler, Kansas for a short, it looks like a 15-minute flight up to Gardner, Kansas. And as they're on final for runway 18, they lost, again, the left engine, and it somehow lost control of the airplane and hit a hangar. They hit a corner of a hangar, spun it around, and ended up on top of the hangar. And you could try this 1,000 times in a row, and I don't think you'd pull it off like this, but somehow these guys got lucky. So if you look at the ADS-B data, they were coming in on final. They did a downwind basin final. Everything's looking good. All of a sudden, the track gets a little wobbly, and their altitude starts coming down a little bit. They're continuing to descend. Then it levels off and actually climbs a little bit, and their speed drops. And what it looks like to me is maybe they tried a single engine go-around, which is never a good idea in a twin. If you lose an engine, you're on final. Don't attempt to go around unless you really, really have to. From the position they're in, it didn't look like they really had to, but kind of looks like a single engine go-around. And I think that because if you look at the pictures of the plane sitting on top of the hangar, the nose gear is retracted. The doors aren't visible. Normally, I think if the nose gear had been if the gear had been down, the gear doors would have been ripped off. The nose gear, there would have been some damage on the nose, and the nose looks pretty clean and intact. So the gear appears to be up. And on the ADS-B data, they actually climb a little bit as they get closer to the runway. So that tells me they were trying to pitch up a bit, but their speed drops. They went from like 85 down to 73, which is pretty slow in a King Air. That's about the VMC speed. And if you've got full power on the right engine, the pilot said he, had trouble maintaining directional control, starting to lose it, getting close to VMC, couldn't keep it going straight, and just couldn't clear that hangar. I mean, if it looks like if they had another 15, 20 feet, they'd have made it. Or they would have just got slower as they continued to climb and VMC'd it. So it might have been worse for them if they hadn't have hit that hangar. But again, if you're on final in a twin and you lose an engine, you shouldn't even have to feather the engine. You shouldn't have to do anything. Just land the plane. You should be able to chop the other, reduce power on the good engine and glide to the runway if you set up high enough and close enough to the airport. Yeah, looks like it happened at around 300 feet or so, 280 to 300 feet. They weren't that far from the runway, so it looks like their setup wasn't bad. So I'm not really sure why they had to do a go-around. Again, I wasn't there, wasn't in the cockpit, don't know what happened. Total wild speculation here, but it kind of appears like they tried to go around. I don't know why. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe it didn't. Maybe they just lost an engine, couldn't maintain control, and hit the hangar. I guess we'll wait and see when the accident investigation comes up with, interviews the pilots and finds out what happened. But a crazy outcome. So, you don't often see a plane on the hangar. Maybe they told them, hey, when you get there, put the airplane in the hangar. They heard on. I don't know. Can't park there. Anyway, super lucky they didn't get killed. And again, though, unfortunately I believe the operation is Skydive Kansas out of Butler. Early June, lose your plane for the season. Now you're struggling because jump planes are all busy this time of year. There's not that many planes out there to lease to keep operations. So this is going to be really tough on their operation. This June, July, August, that's when you really make your money in the skydiving business. And to be down a plane is really tough. But there you go. 2 crashes in a week. Nobody got killed. Super lucky that everybody survived. Hope the pilot in the Twin Otter is doing okay. Guess we'll find out. Again, don't know exactly what happened. Just kind of giving you my take on it, and hope we can do better. If you're flying a twin and you lose an engine, you better be on top of your game. I know I review my emergency procedures every single time I fly the Queen Air. I know what's going to happen. and I know where I'm going to go with that plane. I'm going to go straight ahead. I'm going to get every bit of performance I can out of that good engine, and I'm going to keep my speed up because speed is life. All right. Well, that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to keep your speed up, especially if you lose an engine in a twin.